What's going on, guys? I'm David, and today I wanted to talk about a new little engineering situation that I had come up this week, and it was a doozy. So, as I've said in my previous videos, but if you are new here, thanks for stopping by. But I've been building an observability platform for myself. It's called Sentinel. It's a project I'm really excited about and proud of because it feels like a true engineering project. It's not just a static website, it's not just sitting there, doing nothing. It's on my server, my VPS that I rent. And so I guess not mine, but I rent a VPS, by the way. Um, but it's running on the server. It's running constantly. It's pinging my websites. I can even pull it up here if everything will work with me here. But this is what I'm building, and I've wanted to work with like a dashboard kind of application for a while. I just hadn't had an idea. Anyway, I don't mean to harp on this for too long. But the cool thing about this app is that it keeps bringing up new issues. And to me, that's how you truly learn to do programming and how you learn to be an engineer and stuff like that. So I just wanted to share what came up last week um, regarding Sentinel. So what happened? Well, as the title of the video implies, my Sentinel pings to a photography portfolio that I made about a year ago using Next.js and Contentful. It generated 50,000 API calls within a few days. It was June 9th when I had the email from Contentful letting me know that I had surpassed 50,000 API calls for a month and I was at risk of being shut down. So that was interesting. So, what I want to do today is talk about how I did my investigation, how I figured out the issue, and how I'm going to avoid it moving forward because I did learn a thing or two. So let's come on over. So first of all, something cool I came up with was I use mermaid charts for some visual aids here. So let me know if they're helpful. But the initial mystery, contentful warning, I was 50% over my quota by June 9th, which is crazy. And that made me think what changed because it was only coming up for the photography website, which was fine. I can stop monitoring that. But I was like, well, I've got other contentful websites. I run a website for my dad, and he uses it to post his daily Bible verses, sermon lessons, things like that. So I've been monitoring that for months with no issues. So I was like, what happened? There wasn't an increase in traffic. I'm not popular. Sentinel monitoring, I mean, it was just doing its thing. It was pinging the website every 30 seconds. So I thought, maybe that's what's racking up the contentful calls. Was contentful miscounting? Probably not. My architecture, that's probably the issue. So let's talk about what Sentinel does, just so we're all on the same page. So I have a Sentinel checker worker. So what is that doing? So every 60 seconds, I've updated it, by the way. It was 30 seconds. I've changed it to 60 just to be a little less aggressive. I think I still get plenty good data. I don't need 30-second pings. But I load the ping data. So if I ping it, how long, what's the latency? And I'm just monitoring the base URL of each of my sites. And it's just an Axios get URL. And if it times out or if it takes longer than 5 seconds to respond, I log that as a timeout. I don't want any of my websites having 5 seconds of latency. So I want to know when the websites take longer than 5 seconds to load. And then it checks the HTTP status. So if it's a 200 or 300 code, we mark it as up. But if it's 400, 500, or a timeout, we do mark the website as down. And then we write to the health check database table. So each ping is getting logged as a row in my database. And that's what we get on our dashboard that I was just showing off. I've got the last 60 minutes of data right here. We can kind of see a live update of all of my websites and what they're doing. Incidents right here. And then the last couple minutes of pings down here. So again, this is just kind of what I'm working with right now. I've got lots of ideas and ways I want to improve that. But what I found out was happening was, first of all, with my portfolio photography site, I built it with Next.js and Contentful. Nothing wrong with either of the technologies. It was a skill issue. We've all been there. More specifically with Contentful and Next.js, while I was building the website, I knew I had to come back and make some changes because first thing I was using incremental static regeneration, which if you're not familiar with it, I'm going to get to it here in a second. But the way that was running was causing more calls to Contentful than I needed. And then, more specifically, on top of that, I was not being efficient in my calls to Contentful. So we'll get into all that. So, what is ISR? If you're not familiar, if you're not a Next.js kind of guy or gal, incremental static regeneration is this really interesting hybrid model between having a completely static website and having a dynamic website. It's actually really cool. So, what it does is it serves cached data and it checks if that data has been stale, older than, an amount you set, a minute, an hour, a day. The visitor who visits and it recognizes that the data is that stale. Let's say you're doing updates every minute. So the data is more than a minute old. When a user hits your website, they'll get the stale data. What happens in the background, what Next.js does, which is pretty cool, is it then runs that data pipelines for you, if you want to call it that. It'll call the Contentful API more specifically, and it will load and gather all the updated data for you in the background. So users never experience any downtime or latency fetching new data. So then the next visitor who comes to the site, or if the user hits refresh, they get the new data. So request comes in, is cache page fresh? If yes, you just get the cached HTML, no updates. But if it's considered stale, we serve the stale data immediately, but then we regenerate in the background, fetch data again, and then next user gets the fresh cache data. So the way I had my website set up, it was not efficient. And it's because I was doing that thing that nobody ever has done before, obviously. No, not a soul has ever done this. You go and you say, let me write a to do. I originally set the ISR cache age to 60 seconds just for testing. And because I was not popular and getting tons of views and catching this sooner, I left it and forgot about it. Nobody's ever done that, right? So I left it and Sentinel exposed it. Because when Sentinel runs a get on my Vercel Next.js ISR application, it was essentially aligning perfectly with the cache reset. So it was calling every minute new contentful data. But as I'll get into in a second, I wasn't being efficient with the actual contentful calls. So what I have right here, and actually it may be easier if I just show the website here. I wasn't being efficient with my calls to contentful because every component here had its own function that was calling contentful and checking for data individually. It wasn't one big call. And this is something I even learned and implemented in Sentinel, where when you load the dashboard actually calls one function which goes to the back end and gathers everything all at once and returns it. So it's one to one. Yeah, there are multiple queries running on the back end, but we fetch them all together and return them in one function. This was doing it 11 times because all of this, each component you're seeing here, the featured locations, publications, and prints, everything was rendering this content from Contentful. So on top of the fact that I was calling Contentful every minute, because again, if you want to do the math, there are 60 minutes in an hour. I was going to do the math. Never mind. Never mind. You do the math. You figure it out. It doesn't equal 50,000 pings in in 9 days or 50,000 API calls. It does get to 50,000 API calls when you're making 11 every single time it runs a check. So that was my real problem. I was not being efficient. So this just revealed that I had not set up this website properly to handle not just traffic, but something like Sentinel. Now let's talk about Astro really quick, just to give you something to compare it to. So the Astro static first model. Astro is static by default, but it can be opted into some type of server-side rendering for dynamic services. That would require like a Cloudflare worker, for example. So it can be dynamic, but Astro's big thing is that it doesn't serve a lot of JavaScript and it's extremely fast. So if I'm building a static site and if I were to rebuild this uh, photography portfolio, my brain completely blank there, I would build it with Astro because the content's not updating every minute. I'm not catering my any of the data to like users based on their geolocation, for example. So Contentful turns, or excuse me, Astro turns into the more favorable choice, but you could still use Next.js for static rendering if you wanted Next.js for its other features, or if you just like Next.js. So again, like I don't want to start a framework war here. It's just really these are just rendering strategies. So my Astro site, it's hooked up to Contentful, but every time you visit the website, you're not making a call to Contentful because Contentful sends data to my, or I make a call to Contentful more specifically at build time because it's a static application. It's not changing. So when the application code is compiled, it calls Contentful. So unless you're building and pushing to GitHub and pushing changes 100,000 times a month, you'll not hit the 100,000 API call limit. So that's what's interesting about Astro. That's why it's interesting in, you know, when you have a static site, you can have more control over your CMS because it could be whatever you're using. It doesn't need to be Contentful. I like Contentful personally, but if you're using anything, you'd have more control over it with the static build because you're not calling the Contentful API every time. But if you need fresher content, ISR and Next.js dynamic websites are a much better rendering strategy for you. And these notes, I think I was planning on just getting a little bit more into the weeds. So if you're interested in the notes, I'll put them on my GitHub. I'll put the link below. Um, But I was thinking about Sentinel, and you know, the rendering strategies are an obvious thing I need to fix. But Sentinel could be improved to help alleviate making frivolous calls to a dynamic website, something using ISR like Next.js, my Next.js application. So previously, what it was doing, it would just get the root, and then in my ISR example, that would cause everything to be queried again. And again, this all can be optimized. But sometimes you want the fresh data. So I shouldn't create a solution or a monitoring application that's going to trigger ISR frivolously. Really, all I'm checking is if the website's up. And you don't need to hit the root route that will generate or cause ISR to regenerate data and make more calls to Contentful. So the fix that I'm planning, I did a little bit of work, or I did a little bit of research here. And what I concluded was instead of just hitting the root, really what I need to add on these websites are just like a health check API or a health check route specifically. Because this way, you know, you can check if the website's up and just run a simple health check on a different route. So that's my solution. You know, earth shattering, I know. Crazy, crazy solution I came up here. Don't hit the home page where you're going to render and use a bunch of data. So really, this isn't even a Sentinel fix. I don't even know why I called it that. It's really a just add the route to my website, my Next.js website, and direct Sentinel to ping that instead. And then, you know, you can get your up and down status from that. The only thing that would be a little bit deceiving here, and if anybody has some ideas, let me know, would be, let's say nothing is on the health check, then you're not gathering any more data other than is the site up or down. Then um, the latency metric would probably be skewed because probably only takes a couple milliseconds every time to hit the health route and then to tell you the website's up. So let me know your thoughts on that if you have any, because for right now, I think this is a fine solution. If I wanted a more advanced check specifically to check uptime or response of uh, the dashboard, I could of course update the ISR caching because I don't need to I haven't touched the data in a year, so I don't need to update it every minute. So I could just increase that or check the website list maybe once an hour. I don't know. We'll see. But I do like the idea of checking it every 60 seconds just to make sure it's up. That way you're never missing any downtime. So, anyway, that's pretty much all the yapping I wanted to do today. Not a quick one, but hopefully an interesting one because I love this app. I really love this thing. And this is why I would encourage anybody to go out and just like build something. This is interesting to me and maybe deeply boring to the average person. But man, I love generating data, pulling all of this information and storing it on my server. I already have another talk lined up about how I ran into a little Docker snafu. We'll get into that another time though. But hopefully this was helpful and hopefully this is again another reason to just go out there and build. Like you're not going to learn by doing tutorials or just prompting AI for answers. No, you got to go build something. And even if you are going to use AI to use it or to build it, excuse me, you're still going to run into issues that require some creative problem solving. So that's just my thoughts on all of that. Hopefully, this was helpful. Let me know down below if you got any thoughts, if you want to make fun of my skill issues or anything of the sort. I'd love to hear from you. And I'll catch you guys in the next one.